The greatest of all time. It's a discussion that comes in many shapes and forms and inspires a lot of debates in the realm of sports and esports alike. An underrated topic in this regard is the greatest player in team history. And now that the Overwatch League is technically in its second era, I figured now would be a good time to have that conversation for our favorite esport. Today I'm giving you my take on the greatest player ever for all 20 Overwatch League teams. The criteria that goes into this is rather simple. It's all about peak levels of play as well as accolades and what a franchise has done in these years that they had a specific player. And for the sake of it being franchise focused, I'm not going to be considering anything that players have done pre-OWL. It's only things they've contributed to that specific team. And feel free to play along down in the comments section. I'd love to see how you think differently. But how about we get started? And first up is the Atlanta Reign, and I'm going with Pelican. This one's a bit tough. A lot of people may not like the idea of it being Pelican, since technically he only got traded after one season, and his general contributions may not be as great in total as like Hawk, Kai, or Masa. From a longevity standpoint, I can maybe understand, but I ultimately chose Pelican because the Reign peaked as a franchise when he played there, and they've never gotten as close to a championship as they have with him at the helm. Not before, and not after either. He simultaneously won Rookie of the Year during that one time he was there, and was in the MVP race. He was one of the best DPS in the league and was very obviously the key reason why Atlanta got as far as they did. He was a franchise-altering player, and without Pelican, there is no way they make 3 straight tournaments in 2021, nor do they make the grand finals. So for that, Pelican gets the nod. The Boston Uprising. I mean, there's only one real answer. It's just gotta be Striker. In spite of his love-hate relationship with them, his peak level of performance on the Uprising gave the franchise the only semblance of relevance they have ever had. Since he left for the first time in 2019, Boston have posted one of the worst winning percentages in the league and have not made the playoffs by natural means. And it's not like they've ever had a true superstar ever since he left either. They've had a few iconic faces here and there, but most have certainly been misses overall. Striker was a generational talent and MVP candidate who put up numerous records on Tracer that still stand today. Striker blows any option out of the water. Chengdu Hunters, leave. Sorry to any OG Chengdu fans who are maybe hoping for an Among shoutout, but this is not a contest. Nobody else has contributed as much as Leave has. 2021 saw him put up one of the greatest seasons by a damage dealer of all time, and it came under this Chengdu squad as he won MVP for them. No other Chengdu player has ever even been nominated for a role star. Chengdu's plan has been leave or bust ever since he joined the league. No other Chengdu player even enters the conversation for all-time great. Leave clears no contest. The Dallas Fuel. Ah man, this is actually a really hard one. The last 2 years have seen some amazing talent rise to form. You really can't go wrong with Sparkle, or maybe Fearless for literally being the focal point of their team for most of last year. But after some careful consideration, I decided to go with Hanbin. Call it recency bias if you'd like to, but Hanbin has now been an MVP level player for Dallas in 2 straight years. He's been there every step of the way when the Fuel have found recent success. Be it last year or in the second half of this year, he's done more than his fair share of the heavy lifting. He's arguably been the best tank in Overwatch the last few years, and the team's value has skyrocketed thanks to his consistency. And unlike Fearless or Sparkle, let's say, Dallas have largely been unable to find success when Hanbin is not a part of the lineup. Anytime this franchise has peaked, it has been largely thanks to Hanbin being around. He's just been a really amazing player, and the fact that he's getting top player in the world levels of credit 2 years in a row is more than enough to suggest that he is the best player to ever wear a Dallas uniform. The Florida Mayhem. When it comes to teams who haven't really done much of anything, it can be kind of tough. While Sayaplayer maybe deserves a shout for the early days, I'd say that Yaki is clearly the best bet. The one time Florida were a true contender, it was behind Yaki. It's a similar story to Boston with Striker. His Tracer and Echo play in 2020 led the way to Florida's only above 500 winning percentage in franchise history. Him and Florida's success overall has been really limited, but that essentially sums up Florida's existence. As the only guy to be a true superstar on the MVP ballot, I'd consider him to be the one and only true superstar to wear a Florida uniform. Guangzhou Charge, Shu. For a while, this was a race between him, Krung, and Eileen, as they've all put up equally good cases as to why they were so special for the Guangzhou Charge, but when looking at how the Charge played after Shu left them, the answer became rather clear. There's been a massive hole at this position that is yet to be filled, while other guys on the team have maybe regressed, such as Krong. Krong had that one great year in comparison to one really good and one great from Shu. And look at Krong now. I mean, he got benched for Piggy before the season even came to a close. Shu started pretty much every game he ever ended up being on for the Charge, and there's never been a time where he wasn't considered to be top level at his position under this team. From the moment that he joined until the moment he left, Shu was a main focus. He was one of the only guys who would always get hyped up, and for good reason, right? He was insane across everything he played, and while he never received any MVP nominations like Eileen or Krong, let's say, you can argue that Shu mattered even more since no matter what the meta was, he was always a constant. Shu was their rock, and sometimes he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. The Hangzhou Spark. Okay, this one is subject to change, but I'm going with Guangzhou. There's going to be a lot of public outrage here since there's no Shy, and I totally understand. But what have the Spark accomplished with Shy on their team? Please tell me. The fact of the matter remains that the Spark have been mediocre the last 2 years. Meanwhile, Guangzhou in his rookie season was one of the league's best players. He made a name for himself with a solid Rind and a world-famous Winston, and he was the main focal point of the Spark's attack during the GOATS meta, and it paid off really big seeing as they were a top 4 team in the league, and they'd go on to end up finishing top 4 in the playoffs, and Guangzhou was a top player at his position and was voted into the MVP conversation. Nothing quite compares to what Guangzhou was pulling off that one year the Spark were truly relevant. As much hype as Shy tends to generate, Guangzhou arguably got even more during this time. He's never been the same player since that first year, but nobody can deny his insane contributions when his team was at the top of the world. The Houston Outlaws. Oh gee, I wonder who we could possibly pick. Who am I kidding? It's Dante. In Houston's long history, he has absolutely done the most to contribute. The Outlaws haven't been to many tournaments or have really won much of anything, but Dante has always been a constant and has been a reason why they're at least somewhat relevant. This especially goes during his first year. From 2019 and even 2020, he was clearly their lone star player. His Sombra and Tracer were world-class, and they still are, I'd say, and his heroics were oftentimes the only reason people gave Houston the time of day. And once they got good, he has continued to be a major bright spot the last 2 years, and that has even more so been the case in 2022, arguably, as he's demonstrated insane value by still being good despite switching to a new role. In spite of having awful support around him the first 2 years, Dante has stuck it out as Houston's superstar and undisputed leader. If you thought they were irrelevant with him, just imagine how bad they could have been without him. London Spitfire, Profit. A no-brainer for sure. The OG London squad boast a lot of insane talent, but it's hard to not turn Profit's way, because the one time London were truly good was when Profit was being a flex god. While everybody certainly did their part to win that championship, they don't get as far as they do without him playing out of his mind during the playoffs. He literally formed unforgettable memories in league history with a world-class Tracer and Hanzo en route to a championship and finals MVP. He's the most well-accomplished player in London's history, and it's not particularly close. No other time have London even come close to being on top of the world. Profit gives and Profit takes. The LA Gladiators. This one's a toughie. The last few years have resulted in many good players rising to the occasion. Shu, Kevster, and even Birdring in particular have all been massive contributors, so you really can't go wrong with any of those 3. Some people might call it lazy or unoriginal for having one guy for 2 different teams, but I'm going with Shu. Him and Kevster are pretty much interchangeable to me, but you can make an argument that Shu has been the best support in Overwatch the last 2 years as a member of this roster, and I mean like the undisputable best. And considering that both Shu and Kevster have been around since the Glads started winning a lot, this is kind of the difference maker you have to look for. They've made an equal number of huge plays in clutch situations to help their team get multiple tournament wins. But Shu has been a multi-time MVP nominee and was clearly the starter who kept them together. We've seen that firsthand this year. When he's on the bench, they are just not the same team. Shu makes the Gladiators what they are, and he deserves all the credit in the world. The Los Angeles Valiant. You know, the Valiant are really complicated. At their peak, when they actually were winning things, it was a total team effort. And in general, that's how they've rolled over the years. It's pretty hard to pick one guy since everybody's peak has been so short-lived. You want to go with Kareev for being a role star in 2019? Well, it was mostly just because of one stage. You want to go with Kai? Well, yeah, he was really good and a true superstar, but he was gone after 1 year and the Valiant never won anything of importance. The Valiant are extremely difficult, but after careful consideration, I am going with Space. Whenever he has played, the Valiant were usually really good. He was a star for them in both years, and in spite of his disappearance for a little bit in Stage 3 of 2019, he was always a reliable option. From the moment he got the starting job until he got traded, he was the model of consistency and almost always a top 5 or so off-tank in Overwatch. He bailed this team out of tough situations numerous times and was one of the key factors in helping them win their only tournament in franchise history. The Valiant probably have one of the weaker selections out there, but Space in my eyes feels like the most fitting because he's got the longevity factor over someone like Kai and the consistency over Kareev. The New York Excelsior. A lot of iconic legends have put on a New York uniform, but Jonek is the clear-cut number one. He is largely responsible for their identity in the first couple of years in the league. A big reason everybody was watching out for New York was because of number 44. He's one of the greatest support players in Overwatch League history, and Jonek built that legacy on the NYXL. He helped them be what they were early on. New York's game plan largely revolved around his abilities, and it's easy to see why. The man literally won MVP for crying out loud. He was a DPS Zenyatta, and since then, no other New York player has even made the ballot or has really gotten any sort of credit in general. He has absolutely made the biggest contributions for the NYXL franchise, and for 9 longtime fans out of 10, he is the first guy you're going to associate with them. The Paris Eternal. It's truly a coin toss between Xe and Sparkle. You really can't go wrong. But for me, Sparkle is going to win out. The cause of their rise to the top during the Summer Showdown is undoubtedly due to the Genji meta that fell into their lap, and during this time, Sparkle was unquestionably the best Genji we had. In the second half of 2020, Paris absolutely steamrolled the competition, with Sparkle practically leading the way, and if it weren't for his clutch plays, there's just no way they end up winning the Summer Showdown. That play against the Shock to save their tournament basically says it all. This is legendary stuff that's going to be remembered in the history books for the rest of time. Sparkle's Genji was the driving force behind the only moment of triumph that Paris have ever faced in their history. The Philadelphia Fusion. It's a 2-player race. If you're not picking Carpe or Alarm, I have a lot of questions. As for me, I'm going with Carpe by the slightest of margins. I mean no disrespect to the late great Alarm, but Carpe has been here since the beginning. And just like Alarm, he too was at an MVP level when they were at their best in 2020, but what gives Carpe the edge in my eyes is that he also did it in 2018. He has that longevity factor. He's been arguably the best at his position on 2 separate occasions and has carried this Philly team more times than we can count. He was the reason they were relevant early on and the reason they've been able to sustain so many years later. They've built everything they've had around this guy, and love or hate him, Carpe is one of the best to ever do it, and he built that legacy on Philly and Philly only. The San Francisco Shock. I mean, pick your poison. They have countless legends who have all left an amazing mark on their legacy. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer for this one. For a while, I was bouncing back and forth between a lot of people, but ultimately, Choi Yobin ended up winning out. He's arguably the greatest to do it at the off-tank position, so it's hard to go against that. Especially when considering how absurdly clutch he was for the Shock in all of their most important moments. Every big game, win or lose, you were feeling this dude's presence. There's more individual moments than you can even count on your fingers. Every huge map saw him do something memorable. I really don't know how he did it. And it's capped off with his unreal consistency in the playoffs. He was a guy to remember in both Grand Finals victories. The way he stepped up on Sigma to win the finals in 2019, as well as to seal the deal in 2020, are firmly engraved into my mind. The fact that he was clearly one of the best performers on a team full of superstars is a testament to how much he means to San Fran. I mean, he genuinely might be one of the most clutch players in the history of professional Overwatch. He is a once-in-a-lifetime, homegrown talent. Other guys have come and gone in the starting lineup, but Choi was always there. He may not have the personality or the flair of others, but he gave the Shock everything he had always, and for that, he earns my respect. The Seoul Dynasty. They've certainly had their fair share of well-accomplished players in their rich history. From Jaehong and Toby to Prophet and Smurf, the Dynasty have been spoiled by elite talent. But as someone who cares deeply about how much a player impacts a team's relevance and success, I feel like Prophet has to take it. Strictly looking at what people have done for the Dynasty in particular, Prophet seems to clear everybody around him. He came into what was basically a letdown of a franchise in 2020, and he immediately led them to the grand finals in his first year. And since then, he has built something very special over there. And along the way, he's picked up 2 MVP nominations, some of the best stats in league history the last 3 years, and now most recently, Seoul's first and only tournament trophy. And considering he was the clear X-Factor playmaker during that tournament run, I'd say that this warrants that kind of title for the man. Seoul had nothing to their name before he joined. Say what you will about Smurf and how great he's been, but Prophet was still well accomplished and a proven leader even before he joined. Prophet has an overwhelming portfolio thanks to the last 3 years, so it's kind of hard to go against him. The Shanghai Dragons. The last 3 years alone give them a lot of worthy selections. Flood on Lip for being insane, Fearless for helping to turn the tables and get them back on their feet, and Void for being arguably the best off-tank in Overwatch. But when considering true peak and where Shanghai were at their best, you just have to go with Lip. The Dragons went from title contender in his first year to title favorites as he developed 1 year later. He was their missing piece that put them over the top. They needed him to become that primary playmaker and leader in order to get through that final hurdle to win a title. He became MVP level, and just like Choi, Lip was going off in the biggest games for the Dragons, win or loss, and he did so on whatever the team needed him to play. He was their rock and their closer. He sealed the deal across multiple tournaments in his first 2 years there, and even recently in this year's Summer Showdown. He's just the undisputed leader whenever Shanghai have been on the top, and nothing exemplifies this more than going out and winning Grand Finals MVP last year. As talented as Shanghai have been, Lip clearly puts them over the top. The Toronto Defiant. Considering this team changes its roster every single year, and they've only made the playoffs for the first time this year, it's not exactly easy to pinpoint who has been their biggest contributor. Considering he's been there for 2 years and was a focal point of a lot of their recent success, I guess I'll just go with Hisu. He's been pretty solid and has arguably been the closest thing they've had to a star, maybe aside from Twilight. 2 good years of service is more than anyone else has ever boasted, so he kind of wins by default. Hisu was the main focal point of their game plan in the Summer Showdown, and he's been pretty big in helping them make the playoffs. His Ashe, Sombra, and Sojourn play have all been pretty huge these last couple of years, and it's obvious he is the guy they've wanted to build their team around. And since he's really not facing a lot of competition, I'd say that's more than enough to get him the dub. The Vancouver Titans. Man, this is just brutal. 2019 resulted in 3 people getting supreme recognition. Be it Janu, Twilight, or Hoxel, they all deserve a lot of credit. But we can only pick one. My greatest player in Vancouver's history is Twilight. Hoxel stands are going to be rolling out of their chairs for this one, but I have a very specific reason. For starters, Twilight was just as important to the team's success as Hoxel. I think that Hoxel, he was a really good Brigitte player, top level for sure, and the team's main playmaker when DPS came around, but Twilight was getting similar levels of praise while having an arguably harder job. If anything, he might have gotten even more recognition seeing as he was on the MVP ballot and Hoxel was not during 2019. The thing with Twilight though is that he was making arguably the biggest impact in the league on his role, and that's a huge deal when you consider what kind of team Vancouver were back then. They were absurdly aggressive. To keep both Bumper and Slimes feeding to a minimum and make a lot of plays on your own is no easy feat. He was being smart, playing babysitter, saving lives, and creating nasty plays at the same time. Hoxel mostly just had to focus on himself, especially once we got outside of the GOATS meta. Twilight juggled numerous responsibilities at once and was still considered to be arguably the best flex support in the league. Hoxel carried when it mattered in the playoffs, that much is certain, but they don't get as far as they do to begin with without Twilight. And lastly, for the Washington Justice, I have Decay. Come on now, there really was not anybody else we could have gone with. The Justice have faced a lot of downs since their inception, and most of the time their positives have come in very short bursts, with the exception of one moment, the 2020 playoffs, where they made one of the craziest runs in OWL history. And the undisputed leader was none other than Decay. After only about a month or so of being there, Decay comes in and alters the trajectory of their season. The way Washington played around Decay Zarya is hard to replicate. They pocketed him in ways we haven't seen since Jonek in Season 1, and it paid off big time as they finished top 3 in the North American bracket. And while the Justice haven't quite found that same level of success since, how far they have gone often depends on Decay's ability to carry. He single-handedly gave Justice fans hope for the first time in 2020, and later on they built a team around him and he ended up taking them to the playoffs. Decay is their greatest player skill-wise, and it's not particularly close. There's really no other option. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Those are my greatest players of all time for all 20 Overwatch League franchises. It's tough to make a video like this when the game is all about teamwork, but I still hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. And if you did, it would mean a lot to me if you could hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. And if you disagree with any of my picks, be sure to tell me why down in the comments below. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.